Today, we have a really important issue to talk about. Local newspapers have been shuttering across the country for the better part of a decade, leaving vacuums and holes in coverage and reporting that threaten not only our communities, but also our democracy. On the eve of such an important election, we need credible news as much as ever so that we can be conscious and smart and engaged citizens of our communities. Joining us today is Kim Kleman, the Executive Director of Report for America. She's an award-winning journalist, editor, and educator. She joined Report for America in 2019 following 3 decades of editorial work, including as an editor-in-chief of Consumer Reports and The American Lawyer. She's a longtime adjunct professor at the Columbia University Graduate School of Journalism, where she has taught several classes in investigative skills and reporting. Thank you for joining us today, Kim. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Demario. That was a great introduction. I am thrilled to be here to talk about local news in crisis, why that's so, and what organizations like mine, Report for America, which is a national service program for journalists, are doing to try to stem the tide. Let me say that as I'm doing this webinar, I can't see your questions, but put them in the question portion of this, and Demario and I will get to these when I finish the webinar. I also want to apologize in advance. I know I sound kind of froggy. I'm getting over a cold, so thanks in advance for your patience with that as well. So let me start the webinar. Okay. At our organization, we say that local news is not only a local crisis, it's a regional crisis, and it's a national crisis. And we'll get into those reasons in a second. But I wanted to step back initially and talk about, okay, what caused this collapse? Bottom line, the business models for so many local newsrooms just fell through the floor. And the cause of that is that for decades and decades, newsrooms have been supported largely by advertising and by classified ads. Subscribers were not paying for the full cost of what it took to create good local news. And so when advertisers and classified advertisers flocked to the internet where they could do targeted advertising, and it cost a lot less perhaps than in a local newspaper. Again, the business model collapsed. Subscriptions never made up the cost. And then, people are used to getting their news close to free. Social media stepped in and continued to provide free kind of news, even if there was rampant misinformation and disinformation. And then you started getting into something of a death spiral where newsrooms started laying off people because they didn't have the budgets they used to. And so these folks were not providing. I mean, there wasn't as much good local news that the newspaper was creating. And so who wants to subscribe to a product that is not serving their needs? So it's kind of been a mess. And what Report for America is trying to do is help local newsrooms discover what their business model is or should be, and then getting them back to sustainability. What this phenomenon is doing across the nation is creating something that we call news deserts. There are around 6,000 newspapers today. 5,000 of them are weekly newspapers, and 1,000 are daily. We're losing newspapers at the rate of 2 per week. We have hundreds of counties without any local newspaper. We have close to 2,000 communities with no dedicated local news source. And looked at another way. I think this chart is pretty interesting. So, we've lost more than half of newsroom employees over the past few decades. When you look at reporters per $100 million in state and local newsroom spending, we have far fewer than we used to a couple of decades ago. That means you have no witnesses and no watchdogs in local, regional, and state government. You need people minding the store, and we're not getting that now. And also, we have far fewer reporters who are just in communities, covering communities. And so you get the phenomenon that when it bleeds, it leads. Only the most serious, accidents and crimes are being covered. So you get a really lopsided view of communities when you have so few reporters. COVID, of course, made the situation far more graver than it otherwise would be. Just a ton of newsrooms continuing to close. And again, even today, 2 newsrooms a week shutting down. What happens when nobody's covering what used to be covered? You as educators know that education reporting has really lapsed. So there are so many failing schools, dangerous schools, because they're not being kept up. You've got healthcare issues, huge chasms in the haves and have-nots. Who's getting good and poor healthcare? Basic court and police coverage. Corruption at City Hall, environmental issues like bad drinking water, and really importantly, what are communities doing to fix these problems that is really working so that other communities can copy solutions that work? So, when you have this lack of coverage, we're starting to get data from various colleges and universities that have been tracking what's been happening to communities without this kind of coverage. And so now there's data showing, well, corruption actually increases in communities that have no watchdogs. We know that elections are less competitive and that voter turnout declines because people just don't know what's going on. They don't know the background. They don't know research around candidates. In general, civic participation declines. When is that meeting? Where should I go to find out about this issue? And really importantly, the others are important as well, but cities are starting to get lower bond ratings, which means that it's costing them more to borrow money for municipal projects like school improvements, road improvements, because again, raters realize that there is nobody keeping track of the spending going on in many of these projects. I mentioned social media before. Okay, people are going to their X feed, formerly their Twitter feed, or Facebook, or other social media providers to get their news. And as we know, these are just fonts of misinformation and disinformation. And then we have the situation of polarization that is created when you've got information that nobody knows is factual or not, and you resort to being with your tribe and not really understanding what other people are saying, or different viewpoints. So Report for America is one of the organizations that is trying to step in and counter some of these problems. And we're doing that in a number of ways. Let me say that we work with all kinds of newsrooms. So we don't favor newspapers or radio stations. We want to help all kinds of newsrooms that want to work with us. So that includes public TV, public radio, weekly newspapers, daily newspapers, digitally first, digitally only newsrooms. Just whoever wants to work with us, we want to work with them. And what we do is we provide them reporters and photographers who are skilled and who want to cover local news. We pay a portion of those journalists' salaries, so newsrooms, which pay the rest of it, can afford them. And really critically, we teach newsrooms how to raise money from the community, and we work with them on their business models. So let me get into a little more detail about that. Here's how our process works. On the one hand, we reach out to local newsrooms that have big coverage gaps and that assure us that they're good places for early career reporters to learn their craft and to grow. And then once we pick our newsrooms we're going to be working with for that core year, then we hold a national competition for journalists. We pair journalists with these newsrooms. We give these newsrooms 3 to 5 really good candidates to cover the beat that they've asked us to help them cover. The newsrooms pick the journalist or journalists that they're going to be working with. And then the reporters start in these newsrooms in July of every year. Ours is a 2 to 3 year program. So this is not a fellowship. It's not a summer internship. These reporters are really in their communities for 2 to 3 years, learning in depth about the beat that they're covering so they can provide their communities with just really top-notch coverage of particular beats. The funding model, I want to make sure you understand that as well. So in the first year of a reporter's tenure, let's say, Report for America pays half the reporter's salary, and then the local newsroom is on the line for the other half, but we strongly encourage and we also help them raise half of their half from the community, because we really think that local newsrooms and the community need skin in the game, right? They need to be part of this process where they're bringing this new reporter or reporters to the community. So that's the first year. I mentioned we're a 2 to 3 year program. So we pay half the salary the first year, 33% of the reporter's salary the second year. And then in the third year, which is an optional year, we pay 20%. So this is by design. We are trying to wean newsrooms off our help by at the same time giving them new tools and skills for them to be able to fundraise in their communities. And that has worked really well, let me say. One of the things that I'm excited about is that the public is really waking up to the idea that we have got to address the problem with local news because it's really a crisis. And Report for America is kind of getting on the map as one of the organizations that has had success in trying to solve the problem. So here we are. Here's a thumbnails of just some of our reporters. So we've been fielding reporters since 2018. And to date, we have placed more than 600, it's actually 607, in around 340 local newsrooms in every state of the nation, Washington, D.C., Puerto Rico, and Guam. Many of our host newsrooms have said, our top problem is that our newsroom in no way looks anymore like the community we're trying to cover. So we would love Report for America to help diversify our newsroom. So close to half of our reporters and photographers are journalists of color. And they together, all of our journalists are covering underreported issues and underreported communities. We're thrilled that we can place people in areas that were formerly considered news deserts, so that communities are getting some of their first reporting on critical issues than they've had in years, actually. This past year, this past July, is our latest core. We sent out 250 reporters in around 200 news organizations. So yes, there are some reporters who, 2 reporters per newsroom in some cases. More than 10% are rural newsrooms. We're really trying to grow our contingent of rural newsrooms that we work with, because those are some of the hardest hit when it comes to a lack of coverage for those communities and few journalists who are working there. Our organization, I said we really try to be the biggest bridge between all kinds of newsrooms and financial stability. So we work with for-profits and nonprofits. This year, we happen to have more nonprofits. Typically, for the whole time since we've been doing this, it's about 50-50. And we are proud of our nearly 10% Black-owned or Latino-owned newsrooms as well. So what do these reporters cover? Education has always been one of those bread and butter beats that newsrooms are always asking us to help them fund. Education reporters, when newsrooms were starting to get into the really hard times, many of them thought, oh, who needs an education reporter? Or that's one of the most expendable beats as we're dealing with this crisis. And now, years later, they're coming back and saying, like, oh my gosh, were we wrong? We really, really need to get more people in schools and knowing education policy to figure out and tell our readers what's going on and how things can improve for the better. But we have reporters covering, environment, communities, religion, and sports, because those are topics that can bind a community together. We have, City Hall and criminal justice. Environmental coverage is a big area that newsrooms know they need to cover. And from the reporter side, many of whom are coming to us from previous local news jobs, but who have been City Hall reporter on Tuesday and feature writers on Wednesday and cops on Thursday, because newsrooms have been so short-staffed. Report for America and our host newsrooms are attractive to reporters because they know, oh, I'm going to cover the education beat, and I'm not going to be called off every day to do something else. I'm really going to get to know the issues of this area. Anyway, that's how we get such great reporters covering these beats for our newsrooms. So our reporters, it was surprising to me at first when I started with Report for America at just the wonderful stories that can be had from early career reporters who are smart and mission-oriented and have a scintilla of public records knowledge going into communities that really haven't been covered in years. The kind of enterprise and investigative and just great everyday local reporting that they're doing is so heartwarming. Here are some of the awards that our folks have won. Another big part of our program that I'm so excited to talk to you about, and one of my colleagues, let me say, Denise Tejada, will be talking about community service projects through Report for America, specifically later this afternoon. I encourage you to definitely watch her webinar as well. we require every one of our core members to create and oversee a community service project during their 2 to 3 years in Report for America. We ask that this involves youth media, so helping a middle school or high school, bring its newspaper online, or creating a photography session at an after-school program that results in some kind of a wonderful community event. We see this as it serves all kinds of purposes. One of them is that our reporters get embedded in their communities in a different way than just covering one story after another. We're thrilled that this is also an opportunity to expand the pipeline for journalists. So our hope is that our core members are sparking interest in journalism among these, middle school and high school kids, so that maybe they'll major in journalism and be journalists themselves. And maybe, we haven't been around long enough for any a person who has been helped by one of these community service projects to apply to Report for America as a journalist, him or herself. But I can't wait for that day. When you talk about impact, the fact that our core members have worked with 8,000 students is fantastic. And again, Denise is our point person for partnerships and more. We just want more and more educators to know about Report for America, so that maybe more and more can be part of our community service projects. Okay, I wanted to share with you 5 or 6 stories that our core members have done specifically related to education. Again, many of our core members have come in having this beat not been covered by their newsroom for several years. So one of my favorite projects is by Becca Savransky. She's been at the Idaho Statesman. She has come in again after years of no coverage in Idaho schools. She did this fantastic project on just the dilapidated state of schools in this state, the worst funded school in the nation. What I loved about this was it really answered the why. So bond initiatives in that state required something of a supermajority of yes votes for money to be released to do these projects, and they were never getting to that number that they needed. And the result is how schools look today in Idaho. So here's Becca to talk a little bit about that project.
The Idaho Statesman hadn't had an education reporter for about 4 years before I got there. Just a huge part of what was going on in the community that the paper wasn't able to cover. I've also been able to connect with a lot of students, which is definitely my favorite part of the job. I love just being able to kind of talk to them. And I know a lot of them have said that they haven't really felt heard. And they, are young, but they have a lot of passion about so many different things. They want to make a difference. So it's been really great to talk with them.
So that was great. Ariama Long is our core member at the Amsterdam News in New York, a Black-owned newsroom. She has done a great job of, on-the-ground coverage of day in and day out events that school kids are engaging in. What I loved about this story is that she talked to kids, and many of them know gun violence up close and personal. My friend was shot, or, I lost a cousin to gun violence. So just, talking, engaging students, a really good piece of work. And that's a hallmark of some of the job that she does covering these issues. So Savannah Tryons Fernandez works in Alabama at al.com. Her editor told us about this story. Basically, in Alabama and in other states in the COVID years, free breakfast and lunch was offered to students. That money is drying up, but schools are still able to offer breakfast and lunch if they sign up for another program. But few schools were doing that. So Savannah's editor said that she single-handedly got many new schools to participate in this program by just calling up administrators and like, why aren't you participating? This is so important. Tell me and my readers why you're not participating. And many did because of her. So Jennifer Brookland is in Michigan at the Detroit Free Press, and her focus has been on young children, childcare issues, and the state of things when childcare workers do not get paid and parents don't have childcare options. She also covers kind of child wellness in all kinds of different public systems in Detroit, juvenile justice system, and many others. But just learning, creating sources and contacts among parents, among these childcare workers who often aren't heard, aren't listened to, aren't talked to in the community, creates these great stories of what life is really like on the ground with many of these issues. Carlos Ramos at the Texas Tribune also has been documenting school decline and crumbling buildings and overcrowding in his coverage area. Again, this is a situation with people, not approving bonds, many years of vetoes. And this is the state of schools when voters do that. So Leanna Hardy, she's in Virginia at the Henrico Citizen. She has a dialogue with teachers and other school workers. And so this is a daily story for her. Hey, 23 schools in the midst of August have broken ACs. And you all probably know what it's like to teach in that kind of environment. Just chronicling school by school, where repairs are still needed. So I mentioned this witness or watchdog. Leanna has been exceptional at that. And so you see a week later, okay, now that's been fixed, but there are all these other chronic issues that employees are bringing up. And I think you can be sure that Leanna is going to be on the scene, kind of forcing the issue until things are really cleaned up. So you might be asking yourself, okay, well, how can I help, or what can my community do to help with this situation, to make newsrooms perhaps more sustainable so that you get better local coverage? So personally, I think that 5 things would be helpful in this situation. So Report for America has really been working with community foundations across the country to establish something called community news funds. These are magnets within community foundations to attract donors to donate for local news. And this is a neat concept. It's local newsrooms working together so that they're working with community foundations, and they're part of attracting, this pot of money, and working together on other collaborations too, content collaborations. We are big fans of municipalities spending some of their ad dollar money in local and hyperlocal media. and not just with national media or online sources. Often local media are still more trusted by communities than other sources. So, COVID warnings, healthcare warnings, other issues that municipalities need to advertise. We want them to look again at their local newsrooms, which need the support and again are often better places to put ads than other media. Journalists, like teachers, are not going to be making a lot of money. They never have, and they probably never will. So it's important for us and other organizations to support affordable housing options. You want your reporters living in the communities that they cover, and too often they can't, or they have to have 2 and 3 roommates to be able to afford housing costs. So we'd like that changed for a lot of workers. One thing we're seeing is that municipalities are often making local news reporters go through this awful bureaucracy to get public records. They require them to file Freedom of Information Act requests, which starts a long and bureaucratic process to get records that they are entitled to, that any resident is entitled to by state public records laws. So we encourage municipalities to make that easier, just so reporters can do their job and be adequate watchdogs for the communities. Then, of course, we want people to buy subscriptions, to become a member of a newsroom, as some newsrooms are asking, or make a donation. It was too self-serving for me to put and support Report for America, but I want people to do that as well. Okay, now that is the conclusion of my webinar, but I would love to take some of your questions. I'm going to stop the share now.
Thank you so much, Kim. That was amazing. That was an amazing presentation. And again, everybody, I'm Demario Phibbs-Smith. I'm the Senior Manager of Community Learning at NLP. Before I came here, I was a journalist myself, first starting at the Chicago Sun-Times and then working for a number of digital publications. And Kim, your talk on the state of local news is something that I've been studying for a while now, something I've been very concerned about as a local journalist myself. You got your start in local journalism actually in Tampa Bay. So tell me more about what did you learn from the community, and how did you build relationships, and what did that mean to you to be connected to a community for that early portion of your career?
That was my favorite. The favorite part of my career were the 2 years I spent in Polk County, Florida, covering towns like Polk City and Eagle Lake and Mulberry and Auburndale. I learned to get connected in those communities by living there and by doing my wash in the local laundromat. And you got to kind of hang around. There was not a program like Report for America when I started out. I wish there was, because the kind of support that we offer to journalists includes dozens and dozens of training sessions each year on beat specific training, and also how do you create trust in a neighborhood when you're going in for the first time. We provide mentorship to every one of our core members who wants it. And I had to kind of seek out my own mentors who were great, and that's terrific. But that's another thing that Report for America offers. And then just the network of journalists who are covering kind of similar things that you are. you know, in every profession, there's kind of a network that you reach out to. I created my own, as did journalists who were starting out when I did. But with Reports for America, like there are 250 other people out there right now that they can reach out to and help. So anyway, I think, you know, making connections and seeing the value in local news that I had and that these reporters today have, and that is just so crucial. It was just a great part of the job.
Oh, wow. And we have a lot of great questions. Thank you so much for that. We have a lot of great questions to get to from the audience. And we'll start here. This question comes from Laura Lynn. She asks, I'm a retired journalist and an instructional designer planning to launch an online weekly newspaper in Raleigh in 2024. And we'll focus on city politics and features and other features. Any advice for how she might go about doing her work or people that she might want to think about reaching out to?
So I love this question. I think online newsletters are a great way to go, and I encourage, you know, other people and other communities to go that route. It's the kind of the least expensive option out there. You're not building a website necessarily. You're going out with a newsletter. I'm just, Laura Lynn, I can talk to you maybe after this session. I don't know if you're asking for like story idea advice or, you know, who to hire. Happy to help you and talk to you about all of that stuff. But I would encourage, when you say online weekly newspaper, I think you're talking about a newsletter, and congratulations to you, because I wish more people would go that route.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially with the Substack community being built, people building brands around their work as journalists, and their knowledge of the industry, I think is incredibly promising in this time where we see such a decline in those things in other spaces. So for the next question, this is an anonymous user, but they asked, what does Report for America do in communities where there are no longer newsrooms to help? Where all the local media is kind of non-existent?
That's a great question too. So let me say, you know, one of the developments that that we're seeing and really liking are that, you know, where the newspapers have dried up, we're seeing radio stations that are recommitting to cover local news. So we are definitely working with some of those, but we're really promoters of partnerships. And we definitely want to do more of these. So if the newspaper has left, is there a university with maybe college students who are starting to play that role? I think Marquette University is one of these players, and we have worked with them for years. Can we support a core member as part of kind of a university project that is getting this news out to the community in a way different than, you know, just partnering with the local newspaper? But yeah, is there a community foundation and a university and maybe an adjacent newsroom that we could work with to provide local news where, you know, the traditional sources have kind of left the scene?
Awesome. Elizabeth asks, are there resources on how to start a school journalism club or newspaper? They're in a rural area with a problem of experience this local news crisis as well. So do you have any advice for them on how to start like a high school journalism club?
Absolutely. Again, my colleague, Denise Tejada, who is our czarina of service projects, would be a really good resource. So I've created a PDF of this webinar, my webinar, and the last page has some contact information where you can reach out to Report for America. And Elizabeth, I'm happy to put you in touch with Denise and any information that we have about that.
Oh, wow. So we got some really good questions, a little longer and a little bit more complicated, but Paul asks, given the ratio of non-for-profit partner newsrooms versus for-profit, how do you feel about the prioritization of making for-profit newsrooms more sustainable? Does that matter to the future of journalism, or can journalism as a whole be healthy with for-profits carrying 30 to 40, basically like the lion's share of the work, or a decreasing share of the work?
So our feeling about, we are kind of agnostic when it comes to do we support for-profits and nonprofits? We support both. I mean, and when I talk about for-profits, it's largely independent, locally owned for-profits, or kind of local or regional chains, because we think a very interesting and good development in the world of local news is that we have not-for-profits kind of coming in, creating new products for communities, but nonprofits are not going to replace all the local, weekly and daily for-profits out there. There is not the donor base to do that in much of the country. There are, digital divide kind of gaps, such that many people don't have internet in certain parts of the country. So my feeling is that, yes, encourage nonprofit online startups where they work, but we have to find a way to continue to help for-profits. Now, we have been, we have said in the past that we don't think hedge funds are great owners for local newsrooms, right? Because it's the profit motive, bottom line, how much profits are we going to make? So we do not partner. We have not partnered with big hedge fund owned newsrooms and we will never be in a position where we are, filling in laid off reporters with cheap reporters that newsrooms can use. We still have some Gannett newsrooms, let me say. And, here's the rub with that. When the big for-profit newsroom is the only newsroom that communities have, we have partnered with larger for-profit newsrooms in the past. But given what's been happening at hedge fund owned newsrooms particularly, we've really taken a second look at our partners. There are so many newsrooms that apply to Report for America that we cannot hope to serve. We are continually raising money for our own operation, but there's far more need out there that we can satisfy. That fortunately, we look very, very closely with partners, and we look at layoffs, and we look at what's the editorial structure today, and what have they been doing with their business, that we try to get that right, Paul. So thank you for that question.
That's awesome. No, thank you for that response as well, because you actually answered another question where someone asked, what do you do in markets where the local papers have been bought out by media behemoths that don't really care about local news? And I think you talked about the ethics and the things that guide you all to that decision of not really partnering with big hedge funds, because you want to protect the institution of journalism and help support journalists and make sure it's done right. So I really appreciate that last part. And for this next question, I think is also a really good one. And it's really a prominent question right now, I think, when people think about education reporting. But someone asked, are education journalists encouraged now to cover stories that highlight student projects and accomplishments and positive things by schools and communities? They asked this because they've been frustrated with the education coverage in their community in San Francisco, who seem to be more interested in characterizing the students of color as predators of their community for an historic amount of time.
Gosh, I would hope so. I mean, the way that we operate is that our core members are actually reporters of the newsroom. So they don't work for Report for America. They work for the newsrooms. But when we assess every application from newsrooms in our program, we look for beats that are well-rounded and that really serve a need, and kind of coverage of, and we have staffers at Report for America that every core member, every newsroom has a regional manager that they can go to as a liaison between our program and the newsroom. And if we ever got a complaint from one of our core members, and if the regional manager in reading their stories is seeing that, this newsroom wants this reporter to cover this biased thing, I mean, believe me, we step in if it even gets to that point. I mean, there are education reporters that are covering more kind of overall watchdog issues, like Becca Savransky that I highlighted. But even she is doing kind of stories in the classroom. And the fact that so many of our reporters are doing these community service projects in schools means that they are seeing and participating in programs like this. So I think there's more coverage of day-to-day positive stuff than there has been.
Wow, that's awesome. No, a great response. This is so true. I think it can be frustrating when you see these things perpetuated in your community, but journalists, good journalism organizations, reputable journalists and reputable organizations, they hold themselves to a standard. They have a set of guidelines and ethics that guide the work that they do. And so I hear your frustration for the person that asked this question. And I do believe that the work that Report for America and other journalism organizations are doing will help bring this relief to this problem.
And let me just add one more thing, because the end of this this question is really important. This is what I was talking about concerning balance. When you have so few local reporters in a newsroom covering anything anymore, what are you going to focus on? Are you going to cover the neat program that this class did, or the fact that 50 schools are falling apart literally, and broken bricks are falling down, and whatever? We don't like the fact that newsrooms everywhere have had to make this choice. And so, but one of the things I love about Report for America, there are not as many people covering local news. Okay, we will find you reporters to help cover local news.
Okay, and as we look to wrap up here, unless there's more questions, we would love to get to a few more questions if you have them. But I guess the thing that I was really curious about was with the state of local news and the state of news in general. I think, when we think about, the national idea of news is really low right now. The trust in national news is really low. There's actually people trust more local news than they do national news. But when we think about it in totality, people have a general distrust of the media. So what are some ways that you think that journalists can better partner with the community, or the community can better partner with journalists to encourage a more healthy relationship?
So one of the interesting things about reporters and communities is that I think fewer than 20% of people have ever met a reporter. One of the beauties about local news, and what we require of core members, that you live in the community, you do these community service projects that are likely not going to result in a story with your byline. Community members see what a local reporter does, sees a reporter at work, right? Covering the town meeting, helping my kid learn how to write headlines. Wow, that's so exciting. And just the presence helps create a sense of trust. You know, many of these local stories are not about, you know, are you liberal? Are you conservative? Are you blue? Are you red? When you have a school bond issue, that kind of transcends some polarizing issues. When you have a reporter covering high school sports, as they've not been covered in years, because again, every staff has been decimated in local news, that helps build trust. I mean, our reporters, and any reporter, you're not going out there, shouldn't go out there to make friends. You are, but you're not trying to make enemies either. You are trying to be the best witness, the best watchdog, the best chronicler of what's going on in these communities. And that's how we try to support reporters and newsrooms to make that happen.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much, Kim, for the discussion. I don't see any more questions in the chat, but before we jumped off, I did want to ask you, is there a way for people to reach you? Because I remember Laura Lynn did say that she wanted to reach out to you about her website that she's building, and she's looking for fundraising ideas. So she would like to reach out to you. So is there a way that people could reach out to you? Contact information?
Yeah, so definitely get a copy of the webinar. If you reach out to info@reportforamerica.org, I will definitely answer the question myself or direct you to the right person in our organization who would be able to help. One thing that I did not mention in this webinar, Demario, that somebody might be asking, well, how does Report for America get its money as a nonprofit? And I should say that we get our money from journalism funders, like the Knight Foundation is one of our biggest funders. So just wanted to make sure you knew that as I was concluding this session.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Kim. Thank you all so much for being a lovely audience and asking great questions. We hope you enjoy the rest of today's event. There is packed with a lot of great sessions. Thank you so much and enjoy your day. Bye now.
Thank you. Appreciate it.